Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Kenny with ITM Trading. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we are going to dive into what arguably might be the greatest threat of our lifetime, the collapse of the dollar. Now, I'll admit, 3 years ago, if you had asked me about the collapse of the dollar, I might have said, not in my lifetime. But thankfully, emergency preparedness led me to precious metals, which led me to financial preparedness, where I discovered that the collapse of the dollar is not a distinct theory or it's not a possibility. It is a real, current, factual process that's not only underway, but accelerating. And right now, this dollar collapse is impacting everything, from the cost of our savings to our everyday life. And when this clicked for me, I felt an overwhelming need to make sure that my loved ones understood this threat too. But to my surprise, I discovered that dollar collapse isn't exactly a popular dinner table topic. Maybe some of you can relate. And it's especially challenging when trying to explain this to my Uncle Jim, who I love dearly, because I want him and his children, my cousins, to be prepared financially. But he is another person who says, that's not gonna happen, not in my lifetime. Maybe you know someone like this too. An Uncle Jim, a loved one, a friend, a child, a coworker, who you want to make sure they understand the threat that we're all facing. But who can blame them? This isn't taught in schools, it's not on the news, and those in power certainly don't want us to understand, because they benefit from keeping us in the dark. But today, I want to change that. My goal is to simplify this complex crisis so that we all can not only understand it, but help explain it better so that we can all learn and grow together. By the end of this session, I want to make sure that we all can understand what are the four major driving forces of this collapse, how this process is accelerating today, and most importantly, how you can protect yourself. Because this isn't just financial education, it's financial self-defense. But before we dive into what's driving the collapse, it's important to understand why the dollar's role is so central to everything. Picture the global economy as a giant marketplace, and the US dollar is the only currency that everyone agrees to use. No matter where you are, you need dollars to buy and sell, and for the US, it's like owning the only ATM in the entire marketplace. Every time someone needs cash, they come to you. Now, of course, this monopoly has given the United States tremendous power because it can print dollars endlessly without immediate consequences. It enjoys low borrowing costs, which means they can finance massive deficits cheaply, and global demand keeps the dollar's value propped up, even with excess printing. But what happens when the vendors in the marketplace don't want to use your ATM anymore? Well, then the US loses its privilege. Printing dollars becomes dangerous, borrowing costs soar, and the dollar weakens, making life more expensive for everyone. Right now, the dollar's seemingly strong value is fueled by US higher interest rates compared to other countries, which of course attracts global investors. But when someone tells you that the dollar is strong, they just mean its value compared to other currencies. It has nothing to do with its depreciating global use. In fact, recent gains are nothing more than a Band-Aid, covering up a gaping wound. In the last 25 years, the dollar as a total share of foreign exchange reserves has dropped by 15%. And in the next 10 years, if nothing changes, which, spoiler, it will, and I'll explain why, the dollar will be less than half of all reserves, which is an obvious sign that the dollar as the global reserve currency is living on borrowed time. But this erosion isn't happening by chance. There are powerful driving forces pushing this forward. Let's break down them together, starting with the most significant, unsustainable US debt. This probably isn't a surprise for any of you, but of course, the biggest reason attributing to this is the United States itself. Imagine the US like a business owner who's been spending way beyond their means. They keep borrowing money like crazy to keep their business running, and investors, other countries, have been willing to fund them because they believe the business is reliable. But now the debt is so high that those investors are starting to worry. They realize there is no way they're going to be able to pay this back. The business owner now has two bad options. Option one, create more shares to cover the debt, diluting each share existing, or risk a complete collapse of confidence. Defaulting on the debt, the business goes under, and no one invests with you again. Now, most likely, the business owner is going to choose option 1, but inevitably, it will lead to option 2. Now, this is the point where someone like Uncle Jim might roll his eyes and say, the United States will never default on its debt. I'm sure you've heard that before, but here's the thing. The United States does not need to default on its debt to lose its position or its power. Because ultimately, printing an excessive amount of dollars, leading to inflation, to hyperinflation, is going to have the same effect. And the same way that those investors realized that the business owner had no intention to pay back the debt, well, this is exactly what's happening with foreign countries who are realizing politicians on both sides have no real interest in paying back the debt because it doesn't serve their immediate interests. So the debt keeps growing and the risks keep growing with it. But unsustainable debt is just one piece of this puzzle, which brings us to number 2, the weaponization of the dollar. When we think about America's power, we picture missiles, tanks, guns. But the most powerful weapon is the dollar. It's a silent, invisible weapon that can be used against almost every person at any time and any place. But over the last few years, it has become far less invisible. Let me take you to February 26th, 2022 at 5:13 p.m., when the United States imposed sanctions on Russia in an attempt to deter their war with Ukraine. Now, on the surface, it might have just seemed like any other set of sanctions, but this time was different. When the U.S. had enacted sanctions before, freezing foreign assets held in American central banks, for the first time, the U.S. froze assets held in Russian central banks. Now, imagine the difference between someone who owes you money refusing to give it back to you, which is bad enough, versus someone coming into your savings account, into your home, and taking your life savings from you. That's what this was. But then the U.S. took it even a step further, right? Getting global buy-in to then use the profits off of those sanctions, if they could, to then fund Ukraine. And whether or not you agree with this, that precise moment will likely go down as a pivotal turning point in the collapse of the dollar, accelerating the shift away because people for the first time really knew without a doubt that holding dollar reserves was a risk, not a safeguard. But here's the difference. What's going on now, what once was just frustration, is turning into action. Which brings us to number 3, geopolitical alliances. Now again, make no mistake, this move to push away from the dollar, it's not new. It's been simmering for decades because countries have long wanted a more balanced financial system. Who can blame them? But this is where we have BRICS. An alliance, of course, led by Russia and China, joined by nations like India, South Africa, and others, spearheading a global rebellion against the dollar to remove the threat of economic weaponization that has long loomed over them to create a more equitable global economy. But as long as the dollar is still king, they will never be free, which is why they are already trading in local currencies, developing independent payment systems, and leveraging their vast commodity resources to steadily reduce reliance on the dollar. Now, Uncle Jim might say, I don't know, they've been talking about this forever. Nothing has happened yet. And while yes, it's true that it wasn't an overnight upheaval of the dollar, I'm sure the way that maybe some would have liked, this is like a boulder rolling down the hill. It starts small, but it starts gaining momentum, and at a certain point, you cannot stop it, and that's what's going on. Of course, the BRICS membership has now grown to 10 nations with over 30 applications. But it's not just the number of members that's important, it's of course what they represent, such as the UAE and Iran, both key crude oil producers. Now, this is pivotal because, of course, since the 1970s, the foundation of the dollar's global dominance has relied on the petrodollar, or an agreement that oil be traded almost exclusively in dollars. But that has created a relentless demand for the currency. But if cracks are forming, which they are, remember February 26, 2022 at 5:13 p.m., Russia, one of the largest oil exporters, who borders with China, one of the largest oil importers, well, now you have the UAE and Iran trading in other currencies, and even Saudi Arabia, the crown jewel of the petrodollar system, cozying up with BRICS. So, I mean, again, someone might say, well, they still need the dollar. But do not be fooled. Do you not think that they realize that the deal they made in 1970 compared to today, that the dollar is not worth what it once was? that if there was a better agreement available, that they would remain loyal? No. And this brings us to the last argument Uncle Jim, God love him, might make. He'll say, okay, I'm with you so far. But if there was a different currency, maybe this would be different. There isn't an alternative viable currency. The dollar is it. It's the only one. And on the surface, he's right. Tell him that. Give him a win. Say you're right. There is no other economy like the United States. The dollar is deeply ingrained in the financial global system, and the liquidity is unmatched. But here's the catch. That argument is stuck in the past because it does not take into account new tools that are changing the global finance today, which brings us to advancements in technology. The same way that the internet changed how we do business forever, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are giving countries a revolutionary way to bypass the dollar entirely. These digital currencies allow nations to settle cross-border payments directly without relying on US-controlled payment systems like SWIFT. And again, this isn't hypothetical, it's already happening. So for those still clinging to the idea that there's no viable alternative to the dollar, it's outdated. Because I firmly believe the future of global trade doesn't require a single settlement currency. We could be living in a multipolar currency system or a system where no single currency dominates. Countries could be trading in multiple currencies. And while the US's global sway has stalled progress on recent initiatives by these countries to create new payment systems, the infrastructure is there. There is no going back. The same way that digital downloads came along in the 2000s and the entertainment industry tried to stop it and say, no. The idea of direct downloads was unstoppable for people, right? People found a way, and the industry had to adapt. That's what's going on here. And this shift isn't happening in a vacuum. The rise of these technological advancements, BRICS, the US's unsustainable debt, these aren't isolated events. They're interconnected, creating this process, and together they are chipping away at the dollar's dominance. And this isn't just about the dollar either. It's a larger global shift. We are entering what many are calling the dawn of a commodity supercycle. For decades, the world has relied on financial speculation and the manipulation of fiat currencies. But as trust in fiat currencies fade, commodities like wheat, oil, gold, silver, they are reclaiming their place as the bedrock of real value. If we look at commodities compared to equities over time, there's a clear historical pattern. I'm going to blow this up so we can see this a little bit better. Periods where tangible assets surged in value while overvalued financial markets declined. And then there are periods like today where commodities are more undervalued compared to equities. And even more so today than during the dot-com bubble, signaling that the everything bubble that we all know we're in, the fallout is approaching. And this shift towards commodities is a major advantage for BRICS nations. Together, they control double the landmass of the G7 countries and quadruple the population at a time when declining birth rates for the West is going to be causing more economic stagnation. And this is how it ties directly to the dollar's collapse, because this isn't just an economic trend. It's a rejection of the speculative, debt-driven system that has propped up the dollar for decades. Nations are moving to secure their wealth in intrinsic, untouchable value. And you might have already been asking yourself, if central banks are moving away from the dollar, well, what are they moving into? And the answer is clear: gold. The asset that no fiat system can manipulate or print into oblivion. Let me put it this way: the dollar has been the global reserve currency officially for 81 years. How long has gold lasted? Outlasted empires, currencies, all economic crisis. It's no coincidence that central banks around the world are stockpiling gold at a record level, because they know what's coming. In the inevitable currency reset, gold will be the foundation of the future. In fact, in a recent survey of central banks, it showed that 69% plan to hold more gold over the next 5 years. But what about the dollar? When asked the same question about the dollar, only 63%, actually 63% said lower, that they would hold less dollars. And when asked why, the top two reasons were clear: inflation and geopolitical instability. The fact of the matter is, the process of de-dollarization is here to stay, whether we like it or not. As countries continue to hold the dollar less, the US will be forced to print more, meaning the dollar will continue to lose value, and the purchasing power of cash erodes. They're rewriting the rules of the game now, and those who are unprepared for this shift won't know what happened until it's too late. Which is why I personally have made it my mission to help empower others to understand complex financial topics so we can all learn and grow together, us, your friends, your family, maybe even my Uncle Jim. Because the threat of the dollar's collapse is inevitable, but it's not inevitable that we face it unprepared. By understanding this shift and taking action now, you too can protect yourself, because this isn't just financial education, it's financial self-defense. And now it's in your hands. So thank you everyone so much for being here. You've been great. I'm Taylor Kenny with ITM Trading. We specialize in gold, silver, and lifelong. Thank you so much. What I love about our mission is that we're really passionate on education. So if you would like to check us out on YouTube, we have a ton more videos like this. Stay in touch. If you scan this QR code, you can follow us there. We have all the links. Thank you again so much.